Rain dripped from the thick jungle leaves, each drop tapping against the ground like a slow heartbeat. Marcus moved carefully through the uneven path, his boots sinking into the soft, wet earth. The night was heavy, with the smell of damp soil and wild plants. Insects buzzed in the darkness, and far away, something growled. He had been walking for hours, searching for a safe place to rest before sunrise. The jungle was not a place to wander after dark, but turning back was no longer an option. A sharp sound broke the rhythm of the night. It wasn't an animal's call. It wasn't the wind. It was a scream, high, desperate, and filled with pain. Marcus froze, his pulse quickening. It came again, cutting through the constant hum of the jungle. The voice was strange, not quite human, carrying a tone he had never heard before. He turned off his wrist lamp and stood still, listening. The scream echoed again, this time followed by a short, sharp cry. Whoever it was, they were in trouble. Marcus hesitated. Going toward the sound could mean walking into danger, but his legs were already moving, following the echoes through the thick undergrowth. Branches slapped against his arms as he pushed through the dense plants. The ground sloped downward and the air grew colder. He could hear the sound more clearly now. Someone was calling for help. There was a trembling in the voice, the kind that came from real fear. The jungle's natural noises seemed to fade, as if even the animals were keeping away from that place. He crouched low as he approached a clearing. Moonlight slipped through gaps in the trees, revealing a sight that made him stop. An alien woman lay on the ground, her leg trapped in a cruel-looking metal device. The sharp teeth of the trap had bitten deep into her skin, and blood mixed with the rainwater around her. Her skin was smooth and pale with a faint glow, almost silver in the moonlight. Her long, dark hair clung to her face, and her wide, bright eyes darted around like those of a cornered animal. She saw him and froze, her breathing quick and shallow. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then she spoke in a language he didn't understand, her voice shaking, her hands tugging at the trap. Marcus stepped forward slowly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. Before he could reach her, a rustle in the trees made her panic. She shook her head rapidly and pointed into the shadows, speaking urgently. Marcus looked in the direction she pointed, and his stomach tightened. Two glowing yellow eyes hovered between the trees, watching. The eyes moved, circling the clearing, their glow shifting through the branches. Marcus realized they belonged to something, or someone, waiting for the right moment to strike. His instincts screamed at him that this was not a random accident. The trap was bait, and he had just stepped into someone else's hunt. The alien woman's breathing grew louder. She kept glancing at the shadows, whispering words he couldn't understand. Marcus took a slow step toward her, but the sound of a twig snapping behind him made him whip around. A tall shape stepped out from the trees. It was an alien male, towering over Marcus, his body covered in jagged, dark armor that seemed grown from bone rather than built. A cruel, curved blade hung at his side, and his teeth glinted in the moonlight as he smiled. His eyes locked on the woman in the trap, and he began walking toward her. Marcus moved instinctively, putting himself between the stranger and the trapped woman. The hunter stopped, tilting his head as if amused. They stared at each other for a long second before the hunter's hand slid toward his blade. The woman cried out, her voice sharp with warning. Marcus didn't wait. He reached for the small knife on his belt, his fingers tight around the handle. The hunter's blade came up, catching the moonlight, and Marcus knew the next few moments would decide whether either of them survived. The rain began to fall harder, masking the sound of Marcus's heartbeat in his ears. The hunter stepped forward, the woman whimpered, and Marcus braced himself, ready for whatever was about to come out of the darkness. The hunter's movements were slow, almost deliberate, as if he enjoyed watching fear grow in his prey. His yellow eyes never left Marcus, studying him like a predator sizing up its next meal. Rain dripped from the sharp edges of his bone-like armor, each drop running dark in the moonlight. The curved blade in his hand tilted slightly, catching faint light before dipping again. Marcus tightened his grip on his knife. The hunter was bigger, stronger, and clearly used to killing. But Marcus had one advantage: he had nothing to lose. He shifted his stance, lowering himself slightly, waiting for the first move. The woman in the trap whispered something, her voice trembling. Marcus couldn't understand the words, but the urgency in her tone was clear. She wanted him to run. He glanced at her, then back to the hunter. Leaving her wasn't an option. A sudden roar exploded from the hunter's throat as he lunged forward. Marcus sidestepped, feeling the rush of air as the blade swept past him. He slashed with his knife, grazing the hunter's side. The alien barely flinched, twisting his massive arm to shove Marcus back. Marcus stumbled, but kept his footing. The hunter came at him again, faster this time. Marcus ducked low, grabbing a handful of wet mud and throwing it into the hunter's face. The alien roared again, shaking his head violently. Marcus used the moment to rush to the woman's side. The trap was solid, its teeth dug deep into her leg. He gripped the metal, trying to pry it open, but it was built for strength. She whimpered in pain, clutching at his shoulder. Her glowing eyes darted past him, and Marcus turned to see the hunter recovering, his rage clear. The alien charged, his blade raised. Marcus had no time to think. He grabbed a broken branch from the ground and hurled it at the hunter's face. The move slowed him just enough for Marcus to dodge again. This time, Marcus swung his knife low, cutting at the back of the alien's leg. The hunter staggered, roaring louder than before. Rain poured harder now, running into Marcus's eyes, making it harder to see. The jungle floor turned slick, every step a struggle to keep balance. The hunter swung wildly, his blade slicing through leaves and vines. Marcus used the thick foliage as cover, circling around and attacking from the side. He landed another cut, this time across the hunter's arm. The alien howled, spinning and slamming his massive elbow into Marcus's ribs. Pain exploded through his side, knocking the air from his lungs. He fell to one knee, gripping his knife tightly. The hunter raised his blade high, ready to strike the final blow. The woman shouted something sharp and loud, her voice carrying across the clearing. The sound distracted the hunter just enough for Marcus to roll to the side. The blade crashed into the mud where he had been, spraying dirt. Marcus didn't waste the chance. He surged forward, jamming his knife into a gap in the hunter's armor at the waist. The alien roared in agony, swinging backhanded, but Marcus had already yanked the blade free and rolled away. The hunter staggered, one hand pressed to his wound. His eyes burned with hate, but now there was caution in them too. He stepped back into the shadows, retreating slowly. The rustling of leaves around them suggested he wasn't alone. More hunters were nearby, closing in. Marcus turned back to the woman. Her leg was bleeding badly, the skin around the trap torn and raw. He planted his feet and pulled at the trap with all his strength. The metal groaned but didn't break. He shifted his grip, straining until his muscles burned. Finally, the trap gave way with a loud snap, releasing her leg. She gasped, clutching at him as she tried to stand, but her weight sagged against him. She was too weak to run on her own. Marcus wrapped an arm around her, supporting her as best he could. From the trees, low whistles and clicks echoed. The hunters were signaling each other, their voices moving closer. Marcus knew they had only moments before being surrounded. He scanned the jungle, searching for any path out. A narrow gap between two thick roots caught his eye, leading into dense brush. It wasn't much, but it might hide their trail. Without a word, he lifted her slightly and moved toward it. Each step, a careful balance between speed and silence. Behind them, the yellow-eyed hunter let out a deep, rumbling call. It rolled through the jungle like thunder, answered by others from multiple directions. Marcus didn't know how many there were, but he knew they wouldn't stop until they had their prey. The woman gripped his arm tighter, whispering a word over and over. He didn't understand it, but he could hear the fear in her voice. He pushed on, disappearing into the shadows of the jungle, the hunter's calls chasing them through the rain-soaked night. The jungle seemed alive with movement. Every shadow looked like a hunter waiting to strike. Marcus could hear them, heavy footsteps in the wet soil, branches shifting, low animal-like growls echoing in the mist. The rain had softened into a drizzle, but the air was still thick and damp, clinging to his skin. The woman leaned heavily against him, her wounded leg dragging. Every few steps, she winced, biting back a cry. Marcus kept his arm firm around her, urging her forward. They couldn't stop. The hunters' signals were getting louder, answering each other from different directions. He knew what that meant. They were closing the circle. A sudden flash of yellow light flickered ahead, weaving through the trees. Marcus pulled the woman behind a thick, moss-covered trunk, pressing his back against the damp bark. The glow moved past them slowly. It wasn't a torch. It was some kind of scanning device, casting lines of light across the ground. He waited until it faded before moving again. They pushed through tall ferns, the leaves slapping wet against their faces. The jungle floor dipped, and Marcus spotted a narrow stream ahead. Without hesitation, he waded into it, the cold water rising to his knees. The current was weak, but the flowing water would hide their scent and mask their footprints. The woman stumbled, clutching at his shoulder. Her breathing was fast and shallow, her body trembling from pain and exhaustion. Marcus looked at her face. She was pale, her silver-toned skin almost blending into the mist. He didn't know how long she could last, but stopping was not an option. They followed the stream for several minutes before Marcus spotted movement to their left. Two figures stepped out from the trees, tall and armored like the first hunter. Their eyes glowed faintly in the gloom, and strange, jagged weapons hung from their hands. The moment they saw Marcus and the woman, they let out sharp, high-pitched clicks. Marcus reacted instantly, pulling the woman behind a fallen log. The hunters charged, splashing into the stream. Marcus's hand found a fist-sized rock, and he hurled it at the nearest one, hitting the alien's head with a loud crack. The hunter staggered, but the second one kept coming. Marcus grabbed a thick branch from the water, swinging it with all his strength. The wood slammed into the alien's ribs, forcing him back a step. Marcus didn't wait. He drove forward, pushing the alien into the deeper part of the stream. The hunter roared, water surging around them as they struggled. Marcus ducked under the alien's swing, coming up behind him and shoving him face first into the current. The alien thrashed, but Marcus held him down until his movements slowed. The second hunter recovered, rushing toward them with his jagged weapon raised. Marcus had no time to grab his knife. He kicked hard at the hunter's knee. The alien stumbled, slipping on the slick stones under the water. Marcus grabbed the weapon before it could be raised again and swung it upward in a sharp arc. The blade cut deep into the alien's side, and the hunter let out a choked growl before collapsing into the stream. Marcus dropped the weapon and turned back to the woman. She was still behind the log, eyes wide, watching every move. He reached for her, helping her up. Her leg shook violently as she tried to walk, and he knew she wouldn't be able to keep going much longer. The hunters' calls started again, this time closer and more urgent. The deaths of their own had not gone unnoticed. Marcus scanned the trees until he spotted a break in the foliage, a narrow path sloping upward toward a darker, thicker section of jungle. It might lead to higher ground. They moved quickly, Marcus half carrying her up the slope. The earth was soft and slippery, making every step a fight. Roots jutted out like claws from the ground, and Marcus used them to pull himself forward. At the top, they found a cluster of massive boulders covered in thick vines. Marcus pulled some aside, revealing a small hollow between two stones. It wasn't much, but it was deep enough to hide them for a short time. He guided her inside, crouching low beside her. The woman's eyes searched his face, her lips moving as she whispered something softly. Her voice was calmer now, almost grateful. Marcus didn't understand her words, but the way she held his arm told him everything. Outside, the sound of footsteps drew closer. Heavy, deliberate, and too many to count. The hunters were here. Marcus pressed a finger to his lips, urging silence. They both held their breath as the glowing eyes passed just beyond the vines. One pair of eyes stopped, scanning the area. Marcus's grip tightened on his knife. If they looked closer, there would be no hiding. The hunter took a slow step toward the hollow. The air was so tense, Marcus could hear the woman's heartbeat against his chest. Then a loud roar echoed in the distance. The hunters froze, turning their heads. Something else. Something big was moving through the jungle. The glow of their eyes faded as they ran toward the sound, their calls growing faint. Marcus exhaled slowly. They had been given a little more time, but not much. The jungle was quiet again, but it wasn't the kind of quiet that brought peace. It was the kind that felt heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. Marcus waited a few more minutes, listening for any sign of the hunters returning. Only the soft drip of rainwater and the faint rustle of leaves reached his ears. The woman shifted beside him, wincing as she tried to adjust her injured leg. Marcus glanced at the wound. It was bad. The metal trap had cut deep, and without treatment, it could become infected. He tore another strip from his damp shirt and tightened the bandage around her leg. She gasped at the pressure, her hand gripping his shoulder for balance. He met her eyes. "We can't stay here," he whispered, knowing she couldn't understand the words but hoping his tone would. "They'll be back." She gave a faint nod, though her face was pale and tired. Marcus helped her to her feet, supporting her weight. The hollow between the boulders had hidden them for a while, but it was too open on one side. If the hunters searched here again, they would find it. They moved slowly, keeping low as they pushed through the vines. Marcus took the lead, clearing a path while keeping an ear out for any movement. The jungle seemed different now, more alive than before, but not in a friendly way. Distant calls of night creatures echoed through the trees, but mixed in were sounds Marcus didn't recognize. Heavy, deliberate, and far too coordinated to be animals. The woman stumbled once, almost falling, but Marcus caught her before she hit the ground. Her breathing was labored, and sweat clung to her silver-toned skin despite the cool, damp air. She was running on willpower alone. They came to a steep hill, the soil dark and slippery. Climbing it would be difficult with her injury, but Marcus could see higher ground beyond. Higher ground meant better visibility and maybe even a chance to find shelter. He crouched, motioning for her to climb onto his back. She hesitated for a moment, then wrapped her arms around his neck, her body light but trembling. The climb was brutal. Mud clung to his boots, making each step heavier. Roots cut into his palms when he grabbed them for support. He could feel her breath warm against his neck, uneven and shallow. More than once, the ground gave way under his feet, that forcing him to dig in harder to keep from sliding back down. At the top, he carefully set her down, both of them breathing hard. Before them stretched a thick section of jungle, but the trees were larger here, their massive roots forming natural walls. Between two of them was a dark hollow, wide enough for both to fit inside. Marcus guided her toward it, checking first for any sign of danger. The hollow was dry, sheltered from the rain by the thick canopy above. It was better than anything they had found so far. He helped her sit, then crouched by the entrance, scanning the jungle. Minutes passed. The only movement was the shifting mist curling around the tree trunks. Marcus began to think they might be safe for a little while, until he heard it. A single deep horn blast rolled through the jungle. It was far away, but loud enough to make his chest vibrate. The woman's eyes went wide. She grabbed his arm, speaking quickly in her language, her voice tight with fear. Marcus didn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning. This was bad. From the distance, the horn blast came again, this time joined by sharp clicks and guttural calls. The hunters were regrouping, and the sound was moving closer. Marcus scanned the ground for anything useful. He found a thick, heavy branch and tested its weight. Not a great weapon, but better than nothing. He also spotted a patch of long vines hanging from a nearby tree. Quickly, he pulled them down, tying one end into a loop. It wasn't a perfect trap, but maybe it could slow someone down. He set the loop in the undergrowth near the hollow, covering it lightly with leaves. Then he returned to the woman, crouching beside her. She reached up, touching his arm again. This time, she didn't look afraid. She looked determined. The horn sounded once more, closer now. Footsteps crunched in the distance. Marcus tightened his grip on the branch, his eyes fixed on the tree line. Shapes began to appear in the mist, tall, dark figures moving in a slow, deliberate line. Their glowing eyes swept the area, scanning every shadow. One of them stepped into the vine trap. The loop tightened around his ankle, yanking him off balance. He crashed to the ground with a roar, and Marcus didn't waste the chance. He rushed forward, swinging the branch with all his strength. The blow landed across the hunter's head, and the alien went still. The others reacted instantly, breaking into a run. Marcus turned and sprinted back to the hollow, grabbing the woman and pulling her to her feet. They couldn't stay, not now. He half carried, half dragged her into the deeper jungle, the hunter's footsteps pounding after them. The mist thickened, swallowing the shapes behind them. Marcus pushed on, weaving between massive roots and ducking under low branches. The woman clung to him, her breath sharp and quick. Somewhere ahead, the ground dropped sharply. Marcus slid down the slope, landing hard at the bottom. The woman cried out softly at the impact. They were in a narrow ravine, the walls high and covered in moss. It wasn't safe, but for now it was out of sight. He pulled her into the shadows, both of them silent as the sound of the hunters passed overhead. The ground above trembled under their heavy steps, but none looked down into the ravine. For the moment, they were alive. But the horn blasts still echoed in the distance, promising that the hunt was far from over. The ravine was damp and cold, the air heavy with the smell of wet moss and old earth. Marcus kept one arm around the woman, holding her close against the wall while he listened to the fading footsteps above. The hunters were moving away, but he knew they would sweep back through. They were too methodical to give up. The woman's breathing was uneven, her body trembling from exhaustion and blood loss. Marcus could feel the heat radiating from her leg. The wound was starting to inflame. He needed to find a way to treat it before it got worse. He looked around the ravine. The ground was scattered with small stones, and a thin trickle of water ran along one side, pooling in a shallow basin. It wasn't much, but the water looked clean enough to use. He knelt and scooped some into his hands, offering it to her. She drank slowly, her eyes closing for a moment as if savoring the relief. When she was done, Marcus rinsed the blood from the cloth around her leg. She flinched when the cold water touched the wound, her fingers gripping his arm tightly. He worked quickly, rewrapping it before the blood could flow again. A faint clicking sound drifted down from above. Marcus froze, tilting his head to listen. The hunters were back, their calls moving along the edge of the ravine. One wrong move, and they would be trapped. He motioned for her to stay still and crept along the narrow space, searching for another way out. Near the far end of the ravine, a cluster of thick roots jutted down into the dirt, forming a kind of ladder. Marcus tested them. They were firm enough to climb. He returned to her and pointed, trying to signal his plan. She understood, nodding slowly. Climbing with her injured leg would be impossible, so Marcus crouched with his back to her. She climbed onto him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders and holding on tight. Her breath was warm against his neck as he started the slow ascent. The climb was harder than he expected. Mud made the roots slick, and every movement had to be deliberate. Above them, the clicking sounds grew louder. The hunters were close. Marcus pressed himself against the roots, holding his breath until the noise faded slightly, then kept climbing. At the top, he peered over the edge. The jungle stretched before them, mist curling around the trees. The hunters were just a few dozen meters away, their tall shapes partially hidden by the fog. He waited until they turned, then pulled himself and the woman over the edge. They slipped into the undergrowth, moving as quietly as possible. The ground was uneven, covered in tangled roots and fallen leaves that threatened to crunch underfoot. Marcus kept a steady pace, careful not to make noise. After several minutes, they came upon a massive fallen tree, its trunk hollowed by age. It was large enough to crawl through, and the inside was dry. Marcus guided her in first, then followed, pulling some branches over the entrance to hide them. Inside, the air was still and warm compared to the open jungle. The woman leaned back against the wood, closing her eyes. Marcus took the moment to check her injury again. The bandage was soaked, and the skin around the wound was an angry red. He needed something to draw out the infection. His eyes adjusted to the dim light, and he noticed small clusters of fungus growing on the inside walls of the log. He didn't recognize them, so he didn't risk using them. Instead, he remembered the stream they had crossed earlier. If they could reach it again, he might find certain plants that could help. But leaving now would be dangerous. The hunters were still close, and the sound of their horn could carry far. Marcus decided to wait until nightfall. Hours passed slowly. The woman spoke softly now and then, her words gentle despite the language barrier. Sometimes she looked at him as if studying his face, as though trying to understand why he had helped her. Marcus didn't have an answer he could give her, even if they could speak the same tongue. When the last light of day faded and the jungle shifted to night sounds, Marcus crawled out of the log. The mist had thickened again, hiding much of the forest floor. He helped her up, and together they moved toward where he thought the stream would be. The journey was slow. Her leg dragged, and she leaned on him heavily. Twice, they had to stop and crouch low as distant lights flickered through the fog. The hunters were still out there, sweeping the area. Finally, they reached the stream. The sound of running water was like a small promise of safety. Marcus helped her sit on a rock, then knelt to search the bank. He found a cluster of long, thin leaves with a strong medicinal smell when crushed. He recognized them from his time in survival training. They could help prevent infection. He chewed the leaves to soften them, then pressed the pulp gently against her wound. She hissed in pain but didn't pull away. When he was done, he wrapped the bandage again, tighter this time. The jungle was silent for a moment, almost too silent. Then a distant horn blast shattered it. The sound rolled through the trees, followed by the deep, heavy steps of something much larger than before. The woman's eyes widened, and she whispered a single word, her voice trembling. Whatever she said, Marcus didn't understand, but he could see the fear in her face. And that fear told him one thing. The hunt had only just changed, and whatever was coming was worse than the hunters they had faced so far. The horn blast echoed through the jungle like a warning to everything that breathed. Even the night insects fell silent, their constant buzzing cut short. Marcus kept his eyes on the dark mist ahead, his body tense. The woman's fingers tightened around his arm, her eyes locked on the direction of the sound. Whatever was coming, she knew it, and she feared it more than the hunters they had faced before. Heavy steps began to shake the ground. They were slow but powerful, each one making the wet earth tremble under Marcus's boots. The sound wasn't like the lighter, quicker movements of the hunters. This was something massive. Marcus scanned their surroundings. The stream glistened faintly in the darkness, and thick trees surrounded them, but the ground here was too open. They were exposed. He helped the woman to her feet, urging her to move, but she limped badly, her injuries slowing them to a crawl. The mist ahead shifted. Something huge moved through it, a shadow taller than any of the hunters they had seen. A deep, low growl rolled out, vibrating in Marcus's chest. Then the shape stepped into faint moonlight, and Marcus understood why she was afraid. It was a hunter, but not like the others. This one was easily twice their size, its armor thicker, its blade longer, curved like a predator's claw. The eyes glowed a deep orange instead of yellow, and the creature's breathing was loud, almost like the sound of a furnace. It was the leader. The woman whispered something, her voice shaking, and Marcus caught one word she had repeated before. Chief. The chief's gaze locked on them instantly. He didn't rush. He simply began walking forward, the ground quaking with each step. Behind him, more hunters emerged from the mist, forming a loose circle. There would be no running this time. Marcus's mind raced. Fighting the chief head-on was suicide. He needed a way to slow him down, to create an opening. His eyes darted to the stream. A fallen tree lay across it, thick and heavy, with one end balanced on a mound of rock. If he could get the chief near it, he might be able to use it as a weapon. He leaned close to the woman. "Stay behind me," he whispered, gesturing toward a cluster of thick bushes. She hesitated but nodded. She moved toward them, her body low, hiding as best she could. The chief stopped a few meters away, his head tilting slightly, as if mocking Marcus for even standing his ground. Then, without a sound, he swung his massive blade in a wide arc. Marcus dodged, feeling the wind of the strike brush his face. The blade slammed into the mud, sending a spray of dirt upward. Marcus struck back, lunging forward to slash at the chief's side. The knife barely scratched the thick armor, but the chief's attention sharpened. He brought his weapon around in another heavy swing, forcing Marcus to retreat toward the stream. The other hunters began to move in, but the chief raised one clawed hand, halting them. This was his fight. Marcus kept stepping backward, baiting the chief the fallen tree. The leader followed, each step deliberate, his eyes never leaving Marcus. The blade swung again, and Marcus ducked under it, letting the weight of the strike carry the chief's body forward. In that moment, Marcus grabbed a thick vine hanging from a nearby branch and swung it hard into the end of the fallen tree. The impact knocked the log off its balance, and the heavy trunk swung down like a battering ram. It caught the chief across the shoulder, staggering him for the first time. Marcus didn't waste the opening. He rushed in, driving his knife into a gap in the armor at the waist. The blade sank halfway before the chief's massive hand clamped around his arm, lifting him off the ground like a rag doll. Marcus struggled, kicking hard against the creature's armor, but the chief's grip was unbreakable. The leader pulled him close, growling deep in his throat. Marcus could feel the heat of its breath on his face. Then, from the bushes, the woman emerged. Her face was pale, but her eyes were burning with something fierce. She held a jagged piece of rock in her hands. With a cry that cut through the night, she hurled it at the chief's head. The rock struck just above one eye. The chief roared, his grip loosening enough for Marcus to wrench his arm free. He dropped to the ground and rolled away, gasping for breath. The leader's attention shifted toward the woman, and Marcus's chest tightened. She was defenseless. The chief began to move toward her, blade lifting high. Marcus forced his legs to move, pain stabbing his ribs with each step. He reached the chief's back and slammed his knife into the same gap he had hit before, twisting hard. The leader roared again, spinning with surprising speed. The back of his hand caught Marcus across the chest, throwing him several feet into the mud. Dazed, Marcus tried to push himself up, but the world spun. Through the haze, he saw the chief staggering, the knife still buried in his side. The woman had dropped to her knees, watching him with wide eyes. The other hunters began to move in, clearly ready to finish what their leader had started. But the chief raised his hand again, signaling them to stop. He pulled the knife from his side and let it fall to the ground. His glowing eyes stayed on Marcus for a long moment. Then, without a word, he turned and began to walk away into the mist. The other hunters followed, their shapes fading into the darkness until the jungle was silent again. Marcus lay back, in the mud, his chest heaving. The woman crawled to him, placing a trembling hand on his face. Her eyes softened, a mixture of relief and gratitude. For now they had survived, but he knew the chief's retreat wasn't mercy. It was a promise. The hunt wasn't over. The mist hung heavy in the jungle, curling low over the wet ground as Marcus sat against a tree, catching his breath. Every muscle in his body ached, and each breath came sharp through his ribs. The woman stayed close, her injured leg stretched out, her eyes scanning the shadows as if expecting the chief to step out at any moment. The night felt endless. Somewhere far away, a strange bird called, but even that sound was swallowed quickly by the thick air. Marcus knew they couldn't stay here. The hunters had pulled back, but they would not give up. The chief had left them alive for a reason, and that reason was not kindness. He pushed himself up, ignoring the pain that shot through his side. The woman tried to stand but stumbled instantly, her wound too fresh. Marcus knelt, motioning for her to climb onto his back. She hesitated for a moment, then wrapped her arms around him, her weight light but tense. They moved slowly through the dense trees. Marcus kept off the main path, sticking to the thickest undergrowth where visibility was low. The jungle floor was soft, muffling their steps, but every crack of a twig still made him glance over his shoulder. After an hour, he spotted a massive root system at the base of an ancient tree. The roots twisted and curved into the ground, leaving a hollow space beneath them. He ducked inside, lowering her down gently. The space was cramped but dry, hidden from view by ferns. She leaned back against the roots, her breathing quick. Marcus checked the wound again. The makeshift plant dressing had slowed the swelling, but it was still bad. He took out his knife and cut more strips from his shirt to replace the bandage. She watched him work, her glowing eyes softening every time his hands brushed her skin. When he was done, she touched his hand lightly and whispered something in her language. Her tone was gentle, almost warm. Marcus didn't need to understand the words to know she was thanking him. The quiet didn't last. A sound broke through the night, a single deep horn blast. It was closer than before, echoing through the trees like rolling thunder. The woman's hand gripped his tightly, and Marcus felt her body tense. The ground under them began to tremble again, lighter than the chief's arrival, but still heavy. He crawled to the edge of the root shelter and peered out. Through the mist, he could see moving shapes, hunters, several of them, sweeping through the jungle in a wide line. Marcus's mind raced. They were being flushed out. Staying here meant being caught. He turned back to her, motioning for silence, then helped her onto his back again. They slipped away from the root shelter, keeping low, using the thick foliage to hide. The hunters moved steadily, keen, their glowing eyes scanning the jungle floor. Marcus took them in a wide arc, hoping to bypass their search pattern. But a sudden sharp whistle cut through the night. One of the hunters had spotted movement, maybe just a glimpse, but enough. They broke into a run, Marcus's legs burning under her weight. The sound of pursuit grew behind them, heavy steps pounding the earth, snapping branches. Ahead, the jungle thinned into a stretch of rocky ground lit faintly by the moon. The rocks were slick with moss, making every step dangerous. Marcus slipped once, catching himself on a jagged stone, but kept going. The woman's grip around his neck tightened as the hunter's calls grew louder. Then, just ahead, he saw it. A narrow cave entrance, half hidden behind hanging vines. Without slowing, he pushed through the green curtain and into the darkness. The cave smelled of damp stone, and water dripped from the ceiling. The passage was tight at first, then widened into a small chamber. He set her down gently, pressing a finger to his lips. They waited in silence as footsteps approached the entrance. The vines shifted slightly, and a faint glow of yellow eyes peered in. Marcus gripped his knife, ready to fight, but the hunter only lingered for a moment before moving on. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Finally, when all was quiet again, Marcus allowed himself to breathe. He looked at her. She was watching him with an intensity that made the air feel warmer. Slowly, she reached out and touched his chest, her palm resting over his heartbeat. They sat there in the dark, listening to the faint drip of water, knowing the danger was still out there. Marcus thought about how close they had come to being caught, how many times in the past hours they should have been dead. But somehow, they were still alive. The woman shifted closer, resting her head against his shoulder. For the first time since he'd found her trapped in the clearing, her body relaxed. Outside, the jungle's mist swallowed the last sounds of pursuit. Marcus knew it wasn't over. The chief would return. The hunters would regroup. But in that small, hidden cave, they had won one more night. And in this hunt, sometimes surviving one more night was the only victory that mattered.